Amie, why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about your background and then jump into your presentation from that.
Sure. Thanks, Josh. So hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Dr. Amie Anderson. I've had the privilege of being in higher ed administration for about 10 years now. I started out as a Dean of Human Services and Education, moved to being a Dean of Students. I was Dean of an online education program or online programs for an institution. And now I serve at Indiana Wesleyan University as the Dean of School of Education and the Division of Liberal Arts. So I'm going to go ahead and get started.
Go ahead.
Okay. So today we're talking about transitions and how to lead through those transitions. Hopefully you've seen the presentation description. There's a lot of things that can lead to transitions as a leader. There are many things like additional programs that you might add that need some additional academic support. Things like increased or decreased enrollment, which many of us I know are facing some of those pressures right now. And then we also have things like restructuring as people maybe retire or there's resignations or some turnover that happens. There can also be budget changes, both positive and negative, that can lead to transitions. And then there can also be so many other factors. So for some participant engagement here, I would like for you to go ahead and put in the chat maybe some other ideas of what might lead to different transitions in higher ed, or maybe some transitions that you've experienced that maybe I didn't list here. And then we'll take a minute for you to put those in, and then Josh can kind of give us a summary here in a little bit. So I'm going to focus on 5 aspects or 5 pieces of a process that you can work through as you work through transitions. So the first one, number 1, is to identify the cause or the factors. Number 2 is to review and assess. Number 3, question and discuss. 4, plan and communicate. And 5, the timeline and implementation. So we're going to walk through each of these 5 pieces. So number 1, identifies cause factors. It's really important whenever you're facing some sort of transition to really understand what the stressors are that are causing that type of a change. So sometimes the things that happen are just part of the normal process, the normal things that happen in a business or in any type of a team. Sometimes though, it can be an indicator of something that's really a deeper issue or a bigger issue. And especially as leaders, those are things we want to be able to be sensitive to and be able to really listen to. Sometimes when we have turnover in certain areas, sometimes it might be the job. The job is too much for that position. It might be due to other branches of leadership or management. So being able to be sensitive and really listening to those causes is going to be very important. It's also going to be important to identify if these stressors are things that are coming internally or externally, and whether they're things that you can control for or not. And then thinking through, is this something that's for the long term, a change or a transition that I need to plan for the long term? Or is this something right now for the short term? So as many of us are dealing with issues from COVID, we hope that maybe some of these transitions that we're having to do or changes we're having to make might be for the short term, in hopes that as enrollment changes, then we can maybe make changes that are more for the long term. And then think about how long, kind of like I've already mentioned, how long is this change going to be needed for? Because that can really affect your plan and affect the differences in the positions maybe that you end up moving around. Number 2, review and assess. So strive to deliberately think inside and outside the box. So oftentimes we start looking at open positions and we look at open positions as I need to fill that open position because now it's open. Rather than maybe taking the step back and saying, okay, who do I currently have on my team, where they're at, and what really are their strengths? What can I really tap into that they're really, really good at? And then start looking at, you know, what can I reposition them and make them in a slightly different spot in my organization and really help them to do really, really well. There's always the budget issue. So looking at what is in the budget, and then even being able to take what you have currently in the budget and see if you can repurpose some of that money to then be able to fill some of the, maybe the gaps or the holes that you look for. or even looking across the institution to say, okay, if I have this position, is there somebody else maybe in another team or in another area that isn't being utilized as fully as they could be? And could I reposition them into a different team to be repurposed more intentionally? Number 3 is questions and discuss. This is probably one of the really important ones, I think, is to start those conversations. Now, sometimes transitions are happening internally, and so it becomes hard to be able to have very many open conversations. And other times the transitions can be much more open, and so you're able to have a different level of conversations with different people. So one of the first things I try to do is always make sure that I'm talking with the current employees as much as I can, and talking with them specifically about their job. So what are the things that they really enjoy about the job that they do? And then asking them, you know, so you really like to do these things. Is there anything that I could maybe take off your plate that would be more helpful? And really listening to what it is that they say that they would like to have taken off their plate. And sometimes then I can take those lists of the things that want to come off other people's plates, and I can see that those are the things that other people say, hey, if I could pick up anything else, I would really like to learn, or I would really like to do these types of things. And so that can be helpful as you start to reorganize and start to restructure. Secondly, be sure to talk to your upline. So whoever your supervisors are or whoever is above you, talk with them about what they're observing about that team, what they observe about the organizational structure, and maybe what they would suggest. There's also things that they might hear or that they might be privy to that you are not, about other movements that are happening at the institution that might actually be able to help you in your reorganizing. Maybe in a position that's potentially getting eliminated, that maybe instead of that person being eliminated, that person might be able to move into your area to help with an area or need that you have. Be sure that you talk to human resources. Depending on your institution and where you're at, there could be a lot of different things that need to happen with HR. For example, if people are under contract, especially faculty and faculty contracts, if they're on a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract, some of the implications that can have. If you're a union school or you have a strong faculty senate, some of those types of issues that might come about. And just make sure that you're thinking through the time frame for changes. For example, depending on your institution, hourly people and salary people might be on different pay schedules. And so timing of transitions can become tricky because you can't do it necessarily all at the same time because the pay periods don't really align. So Josh, I don't know if you have collected any of those others from the previous that we want to quickly summarize.
I do have a number of people. Tom Griffin has posted several, and Cynthia Twiddell has as well. Tom writes first, a rapid reaction to traditional college during COVID without the coordination with the online platform that already exists, and they're having to reinvent the wheel. And then competitive external pressures from big name universities. Cynthia writes, many institutions are experiencing layoffs and the collapsing of roles, and suddenly one is doing 5 people's jobs.
Yeah.
Tom says pressure to make systemic changes but deal with the needs of a discipline. For example, education has some very unique needs that do not fit with business outcome, and that was we kind of hit on that just slightly with Bradford in his session. And then Cynthia says, tricky thing about COVID, we didn't get to do much review and discussion. And she posted this right as you were talking about this, entering this questions and discussion slide. We didn't get to do the review and discussion. It just happened. Mm-hmm. And so that created some of those transition. And then Tom has out there questions. Do you see a time when collaboration and consolidation could occur in Christian universities, more specifically see a major Christian player such as an IW to share education dean and not have 2 types of deans? Does that make sense?
I think I need someone to unpack that a little bit more.
Tom, do you want to jump on and ask that question personally?
Yeah, I'm an IW fan, so one of the things, I guess, that I'm applying to, do you see a time that a dean at IW, such as yourself, could also be the dean at another Christian school that is not as viable? Can we have the same deans? Can we have synergy? Can we look at an academic dean such as yourself as a fixed asset if you think of it that way, so that you can serve 2 universities or 3 universities or 4 universities in the same role. Not suggesting you do that, okay? I'm just saying could it be done?
Yeah, I don't know how I could do that at this point. Like you said, it kind of feels like I'm doing 5 jobs at once someday. You know, I think that there's a possibility. I think there's a slight model for that. Most of it, though, is not where they maintain a lot of independence. So it would be like through buyouts. So I have had the experience where the institution I was working at bought out another college. And so we assumed kind of that education, that leadership, a lot of that type of stuff. There's usually a transition phase where that leadership stays in place there. And then you're helping to kind of move those students either to your online programs or your traditional programs where you're at. So I think it would be really hard. I think it would be more of setting up a really strong hierarchy or matrix type of leadership roles so that there's leadership there and a shared leadership. And maybe that through that hierarchy, then there could be some reporting responsibilities.
I think it seems like, was it Trevecca and one of the other Nazarene schools kind of went through that in the last number of years. Tim Eads is Tim here today? Tim Eads was involved in that process a bit as they were working on the consolidation there.
Yeah, I know like IW took over what's now called the GAP program. They've done something similar to that, but it still, I think, had a little bit more of that flavor of they were bought out. And so they were still kind of a separate entity, but still under the leadership then of those at IW.
Yeah, Terry confirmed, and Tim jumped in as well. Trevecca partnered with Eastern Nazarene for a while, and Tim said he served as VP for both schools for a period of a year. So those types of models, and certainly as you look at Christian higher ed, when we think about what we're about and who we're about, the aspect of, hey, we're doing this because we feel called to reach the world with a particular message and particular point of view. So having that sharing relationship, provided you're not, running people like Tim into the ground, if it saves the resources and it makes the institutions be able to accomplish their mission and vision more effectively or more financially, viably, that might make sense for those types of situations. Mm-hmm. Tom Griffin says of Tim, that Tim can take it. So another one that another transition that Cynthia brought up was the death of a key employee and that the institution is in mourning. So that's another very big transition piece.
Yeah, so another opportunity for engagement here. I tried to highlight some of maybe the main 3 areas that you want to consider having questions and discussions are, as long as it's an open transition that you're going through. And so go ahead and enter in the chat anybody else who you would want to consider going through and having some communication or some discussion with. So next we're going to talk about kind of making the decision. Try a lot of very different methods. One thing that I have found is I tend to be a very visual person. So my natural is to kind of navigate to things that are very visual for me. So whether it's putting things on sticky notes so then I can move the sticky notes around, or using something like Lucia Chart or Visio or something that's an electronic version that I can have boxes and I can move those boxes around and put different notes and put different thinking things around those boxes. There's the good old fashioned paper and pencil, and sometimes that ability of our brain to connect to our hand and be able to physically write and draw can kind of bring out some of that creativity. So really think about doing your organizational charts in a couple different ways. It's very interesting to me how when I do things in different modalities, how I will see things and understand things differently. So I might start with sticky notes and think I have it on my whiteboard and I'm good, I've made that decision. And then I'm gonna go and I'm gonna put it on an electronic version like in Visio or Lucia Charts. And as I do that, I start seeing different possibilities or different ideas. So that can help you think outside the box, that you don't just stick with one method, but maybe try to use a couple of different methods. And then be sure that you start preparing charts and summary documents. It is always surprising at every institution I've been in who needs to know and how they need to know it. And so being able to have those readily available and in hand has been a great help as I'm thinking through those changes, why I'm making those changes, why I'm moving someone from this role to that role, kind of keeping those things in a running list. That way I can then format the communication for each audience that I need to communicate with based off the information that I've gathered for that whole entire time, including things from budget and things from salary changes for the correct departments that need to know that. So there's a lot of different ways you can structure your organization. There's a lot of different ideas. Just a simple Google search will show you a lot of different ways that you can think about how to reorganize and how to maybe demonstrate some of that reorganization. Number 4 is to plan and communicate. So start your conversations as soon as possible to build buy-in. Of course, this is talking about if you're able to have some of those open transitions, transitions that aren't really closed to discussion or closed outside of the immediate people who are making the decisions. So first of all, make sure you talk with the current group of employees or the current groups that are going to be affected by it. So starting that conversation early about, so what do you think about changes like this? What if we were to think differently? What if we were to try this type of thing? Having some of those conversations can kind of prime the pump for the change when it's coming, and really can help also give you some of that out of the box thinking. It can also help highlight for you who are the people that you need to spend more time with in talking about change, because they're going to have a difficult time with a change happening. This is a great way to get input and also understand maybe some stressors that you weren't necessarily aware of that they might be experiencing that might come out in a different type of a conversation than some of the earlier conversations that you've had with them. Try to start the conversations as soon as possible. When you talk about your upline, if there's changes that you need to make, every supervisor is different. Some of them will want to be involved in the conversation from the very beginning. Some of them will just want to know, okay, this is what you're doing, great, keep moving forward. Think about how those changes that you're making are going to impact other people, like maybe your vice president. Is it going to affect things in the provost office, especially if it's relating to faculty? And if you have a chancellor or president that's heavily involved, what type of changes do they want to be aware of and be primed for before they actually occur? HR is another one. What changes are being made for each individual? They will want to know things like the title changes, if there's level changes, if you have a level system, any type of things that might relate to pay, changes in supervisor, and they're going to want to know the time frame. Just like we have processes that we have to go through, operations and HR are going to have their own processes that they need to have time to make sure all their ducks are in a row for these changes to happen. So working closely with your HR department is going to be important, especially with time frame and making sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and there's not anything that's going to derail your plan. So then making the plan, what do you need to have who do you need to have individual conversations with and in what order? This I think is important because you will all know in your institutions who are the secret keepers and who are the leaks. And so making sure that you have those conversations kind of in the right order becomes important. So knowing that, gosh, if I need to talk with this person about a promotion, and them being able to supervise certain people, who do I need to talk to first? Do I talk to the supervisor, or do I talk to the person who's now going to be reporting to somebody differently? And making sure then that I have my list, I've gone through and I've talked to every single person that change is going to happen. Again, I'm talking about open transitions. And making sure that everybody's aware of what the process is going to be, aware of what the transitions are going to be, and that they're at least supportive of the change taking effect, answer any questions that they might have. I then take all that work that I've done in the previous steps, and now I can provide HR with an outline and a plan of when all these changes will take place. I can give them a timeline for everything that, as far as supervisor changes, pay changes, when timesheets need to be done differently. I can talk with them about the different types of leveling that's going to happen if you're in a leveling institution. Having conversations with the budget controllers and planning out things with them. They're going to want to know things like salary changes and pay changes. and any impacts that are on your budget. So for example, especially if you are moving people from one department to another, they'll want to know things like, does that budget then also move with that person from one budget to a different budget? Or are you using budget savings? Is that budget going to stay in the original department as a budget savings for them? They'll also find things as you talk to these different groups that maybe will ask you questions that you may not have necessarily been prepared for. And that's okay, embrace that, because they're helping you to think through that plan and think through that process. So when you plan your timeline, if it's available, like COVID is an interesting beast right now, but try to plan time to have conversations with these people about your plan so that your plan can be adjusted and you can still meet the deadlines or the things that you need to meet, because they're going to bring another level of awareness and another set of questions that's going to help you out in the long run. So number 5, timeline and implementation. So now that you've had all these discussions, you've kind of developed your plan, you've gotten feedback from all these different parties and different vested people in the transition. Now you can start to develop a schedule and develop a clear timeline for the communication and the implementation. So talking about communication out, so now you've communicated within and the transition plan, who outside of that plan or that transition needs to know what's happening because they're going to be involved in some way. So making sure that you've talked with impacted employees. You might think about IT. Are there changes that need to be done in IT? For example, if there are employees that are being eliminated, at what point in time does their access need to be removed? Are there IT changes that need to be made from moving people from one office to another, where computers and other types of things need to be moved from one place to another? Facilities, office changes, security, the distribution, things that need to change from office to office, and then distribution lists, making sure we're communicating out the distribution lists and people who need to change or be taken off or moved onto different distribution lists. Final steps, make sure you carry out your communication plan. So who all needs to be communicated with, the distribution list, who all are going to be impacted by those transitions. And then just make sure that you're being flexible. No, best laid plans are never always 100%. And there's always things that will come along and cause potential hiccups. So just approach it from being flexible and being ready to adjust. And I think I've met my time.
Yes, you have. Thanks so much for that information. Cynthia makes the point, it's very important to include faculty in the discussion. If you lose faculty buy-in, you're going to be miserable.
Yeah, exactly.
But any other comments or questions for Amie? Okay. Well, Amie, thanks so much for your presentation. Great information. I really appreciate it. I've heard you speak a number of times, and this was one of my favorites so far. So good stuff.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.